All right, so I may have spoken just a little bit too soon. I mentioned yesterday that fortunately the war in the Middle East hasn't really expanded in the last couple weeks, and then overnight we got news from two Western officials accusing Israel of carrying out a pipeline bombing in Iran, which would be a pretty significant escalation. We've got some information coming out of the International Court of Justice. Remember, this is the group that is hearing the case as to whether or not Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. Israeli forces continue their operation into Nasser Hospital with a few notable items found, and released information, the names and the pictures of the UNRWA employees that they say took part in the October 7th attack into Israel. And lastly, we've got a story from the Intercept where they say that a Palestinian civilian was handcuffed, sent into Nasser Hospital to tell civilians to evacuate, and when he left, was shot and killed by Israeli forces. So we'll get into that. It's a lot to talk through, so I'm glad you're here. I'm recording this at 7 a.m. Central on Saturday, February 17th, 2024. So last week we got news that two pipelines in Iran blew up. There's an explosion. It wasn't and still not entirely clear what caused that, but a report in the New York Times yesterday says that Israel carried out covert attacks on two major gas pipelines inside Iran this week, according to two Western officials and a military strategist affiliated with Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. According to Iran, they said the enemy's plan was to completely disrupt the flow of gas in winter to several main cities and provinces in our country. The Western official, and that's the notable part here, right? The fact that Iran says that Israel did it, you always take that with a grain of salt. They're always at each other's throats. But when a Western official calls this out and says, this is Israel, we believe that Israel's behind this, it's a little more notable. So one Western official called it a major symbolic strike that was fairly easy for Iran to repair and caused relatively little harm to civilians, but it sent a stark warning of the damage that Israel could inflict as this conflict spreads across the Middle East. Energy experts quoted in this piece said that the attacks on the pipelines likely knocked out about 15% of Iran's natural daily gas production. That's pretty significant. A pretty significant strike against Iran's infrastructure there. It's not entirely clear at this point what was used to carry out the attacks, if it was drones, if there were explosives planted on the pipes or anything else. But one source within the IRGC said that the Iranian government believed that Israel was behind the attack because of the complexity and scope of the operation. The attack, he said, almost certainly required the help of collaborators inside of Iran to figure out where and how to strike. So this is one of those events where when we think of escalation, we think of military strikes against military targets or military strikes against civilian targets. In this case, it's, who knows, sabotage or maybe a military operation carried out against the infrastructure of the country. That also can be escalation. It can also be something to prompt Iran, either directly or through their proxies, to carry out additional attacks against Israel or their allies in the region. Then we've got more news out of the International Court of Justice at a high level. Remember, this is the organization hearing the case as to whether or not Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza that was brought forward by South Africa. It's going to be quite a while before we have the full picture there as to whether or not how the court actually finds Israel on that charge. What we do have, though, was on February 13th, South Africa went back to the ICJ and asked them to use their power to prevent further imminent breach of the rights of Palestinians in Gaza due to the pending Israeli operation into Rafah. So essentially what South Africa was doing is trying to get the ICJ to say, hey, in light of all the stuff we're already hearing, Israel stop or put further plans into motion to protect the civilians in Rafah. The court kind of balked at that. So their response was, quote, "This perilous situation demands immediate and effective implementation of the provisional measures indicated by the court in its order of 26 January 2024 and does not demand the indication of additional provisional measures." So what the court is saying is Israel has to abide by the order on January 26th, which talks about they have to allow more humanitarian aid in, they have to provide safe passage for Palestinian civilians and take caution to not allow civilians to be caught up in the military operation, but they are not putting anything additional on top of that as it relates to Rafah. Now, Israel is required to submit a report to the court on the steps it's taken to comply with that order within 1 month of its issuance. That's coming up in the next week or so, so I would expect we're going to have more information in the coming days as Israel prepares that report and sends it back to the ICJ. Then turning to operations on the ground, Israel continues to focus in and around Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. They say so far they've arrested over 20 terrorists that they say took part in the massacre on October 7th, and dozens of suspects who were taken in for questioning. They say during the search of the area, and I've got some pictures here that I'll show, they were able to locate mortars, grenades, as well as other weapons either in or near the hospital facility. And then during the search of the hospital, they say they were able to find medicine with the names of the Israeli abductees on them. I wouldn't read too much into that in any direction. We're going to need a lot more information to come out. On the one hand, you would expect any sort of prescriptions that the hostages need to at some time kind of make their way through a hospital. So there's this one side where it's possible that's where the prescriptions were being readied to be brought to the hostages somewhere else across the Gaza Strip. Of course, on the other side of that could be the consideration the hostages were actually being held in the hospital, which is why their medicine is there. So again, I wouldn't read too much into that last piece quite yet. We're going to need a lot more information. Then Israeli Defense Minister Gallant yesterday released the identities of the 12 UNRWA staff members that he said actively participated in the Hamas-led attack on October 7th. We've got some pictures here that I'll share. He said, quote, in addition to these 12 workers, we have significant indications based on intelligence that over 30 UNRWA workers participated in the massacre, facilitated the taking of hostages, looted and stole from Israeli communities, and more. And this last part here is important, and I thought it was worth diving into. He said, according to Gallant, of the 13,000 UNRWA employees in Gaza, at least 12% are affiliated with Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Quote, 1,468 workers are known to be active in Hamas and PIJ. 185 UNRWA workers are active in the military branches of Hamas, and 51 are active in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad military branch. When this information first came out, some of the accusations against UNRWA a few weeks ago, some of those numbers were thrown out there, 10, 20, 30%, and they said like had family members affiliated with Hamas. I don't think that's a viable metric in Gaza. Hamas runs everything. They are the governing entity in Gaza. So to say that somebody's family member, one relation removed or one contact removed is affiliated in some way, shape, or form with Hamas, I don't think is the damning evidence that it might sound like at first pass. Just to operate and to function in Gaza, most people are going to have some relationship with Hamas. It's the nature of living there. So the more important thing here that I think they called out was the number that were active inside of Hamas. The UNRWA employees active inside of Hamas and the PIJ is one thing, and a step beyond that are the ones that are active, 185 that are active in the military arm of Hamas, the Qassam brigades, and 51 that are active in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad branch. Those numbers are noteworthy. That's beyond just, I happen to live in Gaza, so I have to at some point interact with someone in Hamas. This is talking about people actively involved in the military branches of these organizations. Then there was an article that came out in the Intercept last week that warrants, in my belief, a full investigation to understand what happened and why. The title of the article here, and it kind of tells you everything you need to know, but we will get into some more details, is, quote, IDF sent in handcuffed prisoner to evacuate hospital, then killed him when he left. So this is talking about the Nasser Hospital evacuation in Khan Yunis. Again, kind of the focus right now of IDF operations. The man involved here, his name is Jamal Abu al-Allah. Now, the information written out in this article, and there are some aspects missing that I'll talk to, but they say that he was previously in the hospital when he was detained by Israel. Sounds like he was handcuffed and sent back into the hospital then to relay a message to everyone that they had to get out. You have to evacuate the hospital. We've got a video that I'll play here showing him returning back to the front lines, essentially, to inform the IDF that he had passed along this message. Then from reports, they say he was shot and killed shortly thereafter while still inside the gates of the hospital, and there is footage going around showing his blood-soaked body shortly after his death. Israel was asked about this, and they said, in regards to the incident in question, it's being reviewed. Again, hopefully a full investigation comes out. Maybe there's even camera footage from somewhere else showing how this engagement took place. Because right now what we have, the way that it's being presented, and this could be true, is that this handcuffed man walked out of the hospital and as Israeli forces saw him, shot and killed him on the spot for no reason. That's borderline, that's an execution, essentially. And that would be illegal, and people need to be held accountable and responsible for that. However, there's some gaps just of things we don't know at this point. Are On the one hand, it's very easy to say that Israel is the one who shot him, but there are also Hamas and PIJ militants operating in Khan Yunis right now. So you can't completely rule that out. We also don't know what led to the man actually being shot. Just trying to be critical here, looking at this, the gaps of the reporting that we have right now. Again, because of that, hopefully a full investigation comes out. But either way, any death, of course, anywhere, anytime is a tragedy. But that's all I've got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, linked in the description below. We just brought on some researchers, analysts, experts that put together 3 new articles last week. They're all free. One talking about Hezbollah financing, another getting into the West Papua insurgency that Indonesia is having an awful hard time putting down, and then finally, one talking about how China is supplying weapons to both sides of an emerging conflict in the Eastern Congo. I think it's pretty interesting. Hopefully you enjoy them as well. Again, linked in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.